Many people think Neanderthals were just monkeys. But how derogatory is it to call our fellow ancient humans monkeys, especially when monkeys separated from hominids millions of years ago?
It's honestly a huge misconception.
Right, because here is the remarkable truth. At one point, up to 15 different human species actually coexisted on Earth.
Yeah, 15, it really shifts your perspective, you know? Like, we weren't just this single lonely branch on the evolutionary tree. For a really big chunk of planetary history, we were part of this whole flourishing thicket of human diversity.
It's mind-blowing. And, thinking about how we even know this stuff today, it makes me quite nostalgic for the early 21st century.
Oh, yeah. Why the early 2000s?
Well, I'm talking about that very specific window right after the Human Genome Project wrapped up, around 2003.
Ah, right. Yeah, that was a huge turning point.
It was, because before that, reading the human genetic code was this, multi-billion-dollar, multinational scientific mountain to climb. But then, over just the next couple of decades, the technology plummeted in cost.
And skyrocketed in speed.
Exactly. We went from this monumental academic effort to, something you could practically do from your living room with the little mail-in spit kit.
It was a profound paradigm shift. I mean, for centuries prior to that, anthropologists and historians, they only had fragments of bone to work with.
A stray tooth here, a jawbone there.
Right. Scattered teeth, stone tools. They were essentially trying to reconstruct our entire story, like putting together a million-piece puzzle with only 10 pieces and no box cover to look at.
So they just had to make educated guesses.
Exactly. But when high-throughput genome sequencing became widely accessible, it didn't just add a few puzzle pieces, it literally handed us the entire instruction manual.
The actual biological code.
Yeah. Long-held dogmas were suddenly confronted with hard biological data. And honestly, a lot of those old assumptions just completely shattered.
And that biological data is exactly what we're digging into today. So welcome to part 3 of our Modern Human History series.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a great topic.
Today's deep dive is translating the fascinating research of Dr. Ramesh Thangavel from the AIML Astrology YouTube channel. We are taking a really comprehensive journey back in time to look at who we used to be, who we shared the planet with, and what is actually hiding inside ourselves right now. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really grasp how up to 15 different human species could exist at the exact same time, we have to zoom way, way out.
Like, how far out are we talking?
Deep time. We have to look at the timeline of hominid evolution.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just a story of a few thousand years or even a few 100,000.
Right.
Hominids, which encompasses our direct ancestral lineage and all our closely related species, they actually separated from monkeys way back at the end of the Miocene epoch.
Let's actually define that split for a second, because I think people listening, they confuse apes, monkeys, and hominids constantly.
All the time, yeah.
What actually happened at the end of the Miocene to force that separation?
Well, it really came down to climate change. Around 5 to 7 million years ago, the Earth started to cool down and dry out.
Okay.
And those dense, continuous tropical forests that covered a lot of Africa, they began to break up. They were slowly replaced by open savannas and grasslands.
So the environment completely shifted on them.
Exactly. Now, the ancestors of modern monkeys, they largely stayed in the receding forests. They were adapted to life in the trees. But our ancestors, the early hominids, they ventured out into the tall grass.
Which is pretty dangerous, right?
Highly dangerous. To see over that tall grass, to spot predators and to carry food over longer distances, they stood up. Bipedalism was the defining evolutionary spark that separated hominids from the rest of the primate family.
So standing on 2 legs was the real catalyst.
Yeah, that was the game changer.
And if we fast forward from that split, we start to see this flourishing diversity of human-like species just branching out everywhere. Like, take Homo erectus, for example.
Oh, Homo erectus is fascinating.
Right. We, as Homo sapiens, we've been around for roughly 300,000 years, and we tend to view ourselves as the ultimate biological success story. But Homo erectus was surviving and thriving for almost 2 million years.
They are arguably the most resilient human species to ever exist. 2 million years. That means they survived multiple drastic planetary climate shifts.
They just kept going.
And they didn't just endure, they innovated. Homo erectus were actually the first of our relatives to truly harness and control fire.
Not just like finding a burning bush after a lightning strike.
Right, actually controlling it. And they developed complex symmetrical stone tools like the Acheulean hand axe. And crucially, they figured out how to build basic watercraft across short stretches of open ocean.
Wait, hold on. If they had fire and boats and like a 2 million year head start, why didn't they just colonize the entire planet and eventually build cities?
By biological evolution doesn't have a specific end goal like building cities. That's a huge misconception.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, evolution only selects for traits that help you survive your immediate environment. Period. Homo erectus was perfectly adapted to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle across vast territories.
So they didn't need to change.
Exactly. Plus, their brains were smaller than ours, which meant they required fewer calories. That is a distinct advantage when food is scarce. They simply didn't experience the specific environmental pressures that eventually forced Homo sapiens to develop ultra-complex social structures, or, agriculture.
So instead of building cities, they just kept moving and adapting.
Right. As groups of Homo erectus migrated and settled in isolated pockets around the globe, they adapted to local climates. And over time, they evolved into entirely new species.
Right. The family tree branches out even more. You get the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, who evolved in Europe and Western Asia.
Yeah, they developed shorter, stockier bodies and larger nasal cavities.
To warm the freezing air of the Ice Age climates they lived in, right?
Spot on. It was pure thermal adaptation.
And then you have the Denisovans over in Asia, who seem to have adapted to high-altitude environments. And then you have some of the really strange evolutionary paths, like Homo floresiensis down in Indonesia.
Ah, yes. Often referred to in popular media as the hobbits.
Yes,
Yeah.
hobbits.
Ah.
A species of literal miniature humans living on the island of Flores, hunting miniature elephants. I mean, how does a human species just shrink like that?
It's a really well-documented evolutionary mechanism called island dwarfism.
Island dwarfism.
Yeah. When a population of large mammals is isolated on an island, with limited food resources and no major predators, nature selects for smaller bodies.
Because a smaller body needs less food.
Exactly. A smaller body needs fewer calories to survive an inevitable famine. So over tens of thousands of years, their stature actually reduced to about 3.5 feet tall.
It really paints the picture of a crowded, chaotic family reunion. Like everyone looks slightly different, everyone has these tailored quirks for their specific hometown, but everyone shares that same underlying lineage.
That's a great way to look at it.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. If there were 15 different human species running around, beautifully adapted to their environments, why are Homo sapiens the only ones left standing today? Did we just, sweep across the globe and outcompete them for resources?
What's fascinating here is we didn't just outcompete them. That is the old, rather sanitized textbook version of history.
The kind of history where we are the undisputed champions.
Right, the triumphant conquerors. But the reality is far more complex and, frankly, far more intimate. As our specific Homo sapiens ancestors migrated out of Africa and expanded their territories, our paths inevitably crossed with these other established human species.
We ran into the Neanderthals and the Denisovans.
We did. And when we met them, it wasn't some universal war of extinction. We actually merged with them.
We interbred. We had children together.
Exactly. We shared hunting territories. We almost certainly shared cultural practices or tool-making techniques. And most importantly, we shared DNA. The boundaries separating these different human species weren't impenetrable biological walls, they were fluid.
And that brings us directly to the hard DNA evidence that we carry inside ourselves today. Because like you said earlier, this is no longer just archaeological theory. We have the biological receipts.
We do, and the sheer volume of that evidence is staggering. When we discuss modern DNA sequencing, like those consumer test kits you mentioned, we are talking about decoding the biological blueprint found in your cells.
Right.
That blueprint is made up of 3 billion base pairs of DNA.
3 billion. And to put that scale into perspective for you listening, if you were to store the raw genetic sequence of just one single person on a hard drive, it would take up about 200 gigabytes of data.
That's a massive amount of information.
It is. Every single one of us is walking around with 200 gigs of ancestral history, coding for everything from our bone density to our immune responses, all completely written in biology.
And when geneticists began cross-referencing those massive modern data sets with DNA extracted from ancient fossils, history literally had to be rewritten.
Because they saw the overlap.
Exactly. They observed that as modern humans migrated out of Africa in a major wave roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, they encountered Neanderthals in the Middle East and Europe, and Denisovans further east in Asia. And the genetic markers prove unequivocally that they frequently interbred.
Which means the vast majority of people alive today are not exclusively Homo sapiens. We are hybrids.
Precisely. You, me, the listener, we are walking museums of ancient DNA.
Walking museums. I love that. That is the perfect way to phrase it. We aren't just reading about extinct species. We are actively hosting them.
It is the biological reality. We are carrying the surviving genetic legacy of human variants that haven't walked the Earth independently for tens of thousands of years.
It's incredible.
And Dr. Ramesh's research highlights a very surprising data point regarding how this ancient DNA is distributed today, particularly when looking at the Indian subcontinent.
Yes, this detail completely caught my attention in his videos. The data actually shows that contemporary populations from the southern parts of India possess a higher percentage of Neanderthal DNA compared to other regions in the country.
It is a really striking demographic signature.
But why southern India? I mean, the Neanderthals were largely in Europe and Western Asia. How does their DNA end up concentrated all the way at the bottom of the Indian peninsula?
It all comes down to the mechanics of human migration and geographic isolation.
Okay, walk me through that.
So when early humans moved out of the Middle East, which is where that initial interbreeding with Neanderthals occurred, some of those populations migrated eastward along the coastlines.
Just following the beach, basically.
Right, and those groups eventually settled in the southern Indian peninsula. Now, the peninsula acts as a bit of a geographical cul-de-sac. It's bounded by oceans on the sides and shielded to the north by the Deccan Plateau.
So they were kind of tucked away.
Exactly. Because of this relative isolation, that specific ancient Neanderthal admixture was retained in the population. Meanwhile, over subsequent thousands of years, newer, different waves of migration poured into the northern regions of India.
And they brought different DNA.
Yes, they brought different genetic combinations, which effectively diluted the Neanderthal genetic markers in the north.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We aren't just looking at modern populations and guessing how they got there. We can actually trace the exact migratory routes of our ancestors using very specific parts of our genome.
It's like reading a map backwards.
Yeah. I know Dr. Ramesh focuses heavily on maternal and paternal haplogroups to track these journeys.
Yes, mapping haplogroups is where the true precision of modern population genetics really shines. A haplogroup is essentially a genetic grouping of people who share a common ancestor on either the strictly patrilineal or strictly matrilineal line.
But wait, help me understand the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Because if this interbreeding happened 70,000 years ago, and humans have just been migrating and mixing and having children ever since, shouldn't our DNA just be a completely blended smoothie by now?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. How can scientists pull a clear map out of 70,000 years of genetic mixing?
Well, it would be a completely blended smoothie, if not for two very specific biological quirks in how we inherit our code.
Okay.
Every time a new generation is born, the vast majority of their DNA, what we call autosomal DNA, is shuffled like a deck of cards. You get half from your mother, half from your father, and the specific combination is entirely unique to you.
Right, the genetic lottery.
Exactly. But there are two pieces of your genetic code that completely refuse to shuffle.
The Y chromosome for men and mitochondrial DNA for women.
Exactly. They act like secure, read-only hard drives. A mother passes her mitochondrial DNA to her children completely intact. A father passes his Y chromosome to his sons completely intact.
No shuffling allowed.
Zero. Because they never get mixed or shuffled during reproduction, they only ever change through very rare, naturally occurring, predictable mutations.
So those rare mutations act like breadcrumbs or a time stamp.
Precisely. By tracking when and where those specific mutations appear, geneticists can literally draw a map of the world. We can trace a specific maternal haplogroup from, say, a woman living in Chennai today, step by step, back along the coast of India, back through the Middle East, and all the way to a specific region in Africa tens of thousands of years ago.
That is wild.
It allows us to pinpoint exactly where populations bottlenecked, where they expanded, and where ancient romantic encounters took place.
It's literally like a biological GPS tracker that has just been running quietly in the background for 70,000 years.
It really is.
But, this brings up a huge logistical hurdle.
Oh.
If these different human species were meeting and mixing across the globe, reaching places as remote as Indonesia or Australia, how on earth did they travel? We are talking about crossing what are now vast, treacherous oceans. Did they build, Massive armadas?
No armadas required. This is where paleoclimatology and genetics really have to hold hands. To understand how early humans moved across the globe, you have to understand the mechanics of the ice ages.
Because the Earth's climate isn't static.
Far from it. Over tens of thousands of years, orbital variations cause the planet to go through massive cycles of cooling and warming.
And when it cools down significantly, we trigger an ice age. But how does colder weather help early humans walk across an ocean?
Because of the physics of water displacement. During a major ice age glaciation period, massive amounts of the Earth's precipitation freeze at the poles and across the northern continents.
Like giant glaciers.
Massive ones. We are talking about ice sheets that were sometimes miles thick. And when you lock up millions of cubic miles of water in solid ice on land, the global sea levels inevitably drop.
So the shallow parts of the ocean floor are suddenly exposed to the air.
Exactly. They literally become dry land. These exposed continental shelves formed the vital land bridges that allowed our ancestors and other human species to just walk between land masses that are separated by hundreds of miles of deep water today.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about Ice Age sea levels, but let's address a very specific cultural touchstone here, especially since Dr. Ramesh's focus includes the history of the Indian subcontinent.
Sure.
What about Lemuria or Kumari Kandam?
Yeah.
There is this deeply embedded, incredibly popular narrative of a massive, lost, sunken continent that once connected India with Africa and Australia.
Yes, the Lemuria myth. It's very persistent.
The myth suggests this was an ancient cradle of civilization that was simply swallowed by the sea. Are we completely sure it's just a myth?
It's a compelling narrative, for sure, and it's easy to see why it resonates with people. It offers a sense of this grand lost heritage. But scientifically, geologically, and mathematically, we have to definitively debunk it.
Definitively.
Yes. The myth of a massive sunken continent in the Indian Ocean is an impossibility.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. Why is it definitively impossible? And more importantly, how can we possibly measure the ocean level from 70,000 years ago to prove it?
Well, we can actually measure ancient sea levels very accurately using a few different methods. We analyze oxygen isotopes trapped in microscopic marine fossils called foraminifera.
And those change based on the ice.
Yes, they change based on global ice volume. We also study fossilized coral reefs because certain corals only grow at very specific shallow depths relative to the surface. And when we look at all that data together, it tells us something absolute about the math of frozen water.
Which is what?
During the absolute peak of the most severe Pleistocene ice ages, when the maximum possible amount of water was locked up in polar ice, the global sea level dropped by a maximum of only 125 meters.
Wait, 125 meters, that's roughly, what, 400 feet?
Give or take, yeah.
That doesn't sound like nearly enough to expose an entirely new continent.
It isn't, not even close. If you look at a bathymetric map, a topographical map of the Indian Ocean floor, it is not some shallow, submerged flatland. It features abyssal plains that are thousands upon thousands of meters deep. Dropping the water level by just 125 meters barely scratches the surface of the Indian Ocean. It is mathematically nowhere near enough to expose a massive landmass connecting India, Africa, and Australia. The physics of the planet's water cycle simply don't allow for it.
It's like finding a small puddle in your backyard and claiming it used to be the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
The scale is completely wrong.
Exactly. The math just doesn't support it.
But while it didn't expose a giant utopian continent, that 125-meter drop was enough to do something crucial, right?
Yes, absolutely. That 125-meter drop was perfectly sufficient to expose the shallow continental shelf between the southern tip of India and Sri Lanka. It created a very real, very walkable land bridge.
And that's the real story of how these species move back and forth. It makes me wonder why we cling so tightly to these myths of sunken utopias. The actual reality, our ancient ancestors surviving brutal climates, navigating exposed seabeds, and traversing shifting continents, is fundamentally more epic.
It really is.
It's a story of gritty endurance, not magic.
We often cling to myths because they offer clean, glorious explanations for our origins, They make a specific group feel uniquely special. But biological reality is always messier. And you're right, it's a testament to endurance. Because these migrations happened over continuous shifting land routes, human populations were constantly on the move, constantly running into each other, and constantly sharing genetic material.
And that continuous mixing completely dismantles another major myth that unfortunately still causes a lot of division today, the illusion of pure races.
Absolutely. The genetic data is unequivocal on this point. Because of the constant dynamic movement of populations, the interbreeding across different human species, and the immense evolutionary pressure to adapt and survive through brutal ice ages, the idea of pure races is a complete biological fiction.
So when people try to claim they are pure Aryan or pure Dravidian, or that they possess some unmixed ancient bloodline that has remained pristine for millennia,
It has zero basis in genetic reality. The concept of a pure race would require thousands and thousands of years of absolute, unbroken, impenetrable isolation. And as we've discussed today, human history is defined by the exact opposite.
it is defined by relentless movement and mingling.
Exactly. In biology, extreme isolation doesn't create a master race or a pure lineage. It usually results in extreme inbreeding depression, a higher vulnerability to disease, and eventually extinction.
Wow.
The genetic diversity we gained from mixing with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others gave us the hybrid vigor, the immune system upgrades that we really needed to survive across the globe.
Which means every single listener tuning in right now, no matter where you are from or what you look like, you are a beautiful, highly mixed mosaic of ancient hominid DNA. Your biology is a living testament to thousands of ancestors surviving, migrating, and connecting across borders that didn't even exist yet.
Precisely. We are the cumulative result of millions of successful biological encounters.
Now, before we wrap up, I need to make a quick note on the scope of today's deep dive. Dr. Ramesh's original video covers Earth's geological epochs like Eocene, Miocene, and Pleistocene, shifting continents, Himalayas, and land bridges, which we skipped due to time limits.
And those broader geological shifts are incredibly important. They quite literally set the physical stage for everything we've talked about today.
Like the mountains forming.
Yeah, the slow collision of tectonic plates that built the Himalayas fundamentally altered weather patterns, which in turn drove the evolutionary pressures on the hominids living in Asia. It's all connected.
It really is a massive interlocking puzzle. But just zooming in on the human element today, it is awe-inspiring to realize that we carry the legacy of up to 15 different human species within our very cells. We aren't just the survivors of history looking back at the past. We are the physical walking embodiment of all those who came before us.
Understanding this fundamentally changes how you look in the mirror. You aren't just seeing an individual, you are seeing an ecosystem of survival traits passed down through deep time.
For those of you who want to explore the primary material directly, if you understand Tamil, we highly recommend that you go and watch the original source videos on the AIML Astrology YouTube channel. Dr. Ramesh does a fantastic job of breaking down the intersections of geography, history, and these complex genetic realities.
And this is really only scratching the surface of our exploration into the genome.
That's right. In part 4 of our Modern Human History series, we are going to get even more granular. We will be exploring the absolute fundamentals of DNA, chromosomes, and the human genome. We're going to break down exactly how those 3 billion base pairs we talked about today actually function mechanically to instruct your body to build, well, you.
As we close out today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to consider. We've talked extensively about how we are walking museums carrying the genetic echoes, immune responses, and survival traits of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and up to 13 other ancient human species. If our DNA is a biological archive holding the memories and survival traits of 15 different ancient human species, what hidden traits are we quietly evolving right now, simply waiting to be passed on to the humans of the distant future?